What's up, guys? Gun here. Hope this video finds you well. In today's video, we're going to be going over the FanDuel and DraftKings NFL Week 11 main slate and kind of catching up on injury news and notes after Friday's final practice and hopefully creating a solid player pool in preparation for fantasy battle on Sunday. I'm Gun. If you guys are new to the channel, a couple things, man. Help me out. Hit that subscribe button if you love DFS content. And maybe check me out on Twitter, twitter.com/GundackerSports. I'm a pretty laid-back cat, kind of an independent fantasy content creator for Daily Fantasy Sports. And I get along with pretty much everybody out there. I have no enemies, so that's just how we roll. So if you're laid-back cat or like Jack, man, come be friends with me. I want to be friends with you on Twitter. If you guys did not see, I did put up an NBA video a couple days ago. It's kind of like a 30-minute ramble catch-up presser on the NBA free agency situation. I go over each team's free agents going into the 2020-2021 season right before draft night, some of the trades that were out there, some of the draft results, and then, of course, there's been a couple of days since then for more free agent signings to develop and stuff like that. So maybe we'll do another video next week kind of catching up and talking about it. I like to stay up to the beat, on the beat when it comes to NBA, as the NBA season is just a month away, knock on wood. If you guys were like me or are like me and you've just been playing NFL daily fantasy and you haven't really tried any other sport yet, well, I actually was that person. When I was first playing DFS, it was just playing some weekend NFL. I was working a full-time job, and then after a while, I did all right. And then NBA came along, and I was like, hey, let me look at this. I was pretty much a casual NBA player. It was probably 6-7 years ago. And then I started doing really good, and I started making more money from NBA than I was making from my 9-to-5, and eventually I full-on quit that. Was able to cultivate a pretty cool community right here on YouTube, and from that I've created some proprietary tools and a community that has been a premium subscription for the past 5 years now, and so far so good. I mean, my recidivism when it comes to customers is so high that I know people appreciate the content, the product, and believe that there's value in what I offer. So if you guys want to test out what I do offer, we have record low prices in this COVID-stricken year because we only have NFL right now, right? We're going into Thanksgiving week and we only have NFL, so I did not feel comfortable charging full price when there's only about 1 day of coverage a week right now, even though we do have a 24/7 Discord, and those guys are grinding everything, college, tennis, you name esports. From what I spearhead, I did not feel right charging the full price. So the full price is usually $30 a week, $100 a month. Right now, week pass is at $15, $25 for 2 weeks, and the month for $40. This will be the last weekend I can have that month pass for $40, as in about a month the NBA season kicks off, and then that last week will kind of overlap with NBA coverage. So this is one of the lower risk opportunities when it comes to investment, that you guys can get access to the VIP content. And if you guys want to do that, go to rundfs.com, get yourself signed up, and test it out. I have, by popular demand, offered or listed the 2021 year pass, and that's the 12-month rolling coverage, or actually the 12-month January to December coverage. That's at $700 again this year. It's been $700 last couple of years. We haven't moved up on the prices because I think everyone's kind of happy with where we're at. And then, of course, I was asked the other day to have an NBA season pass so they can just get locked in and get it over with. And that's up as well. We're going to call that the MVP package, $400. Get you covered to about June, hoping COVID doesn't interfere with everything. Because I don't like to chop up different sports and stuff like that. Basically, if you get a VIP pass, no matter what your intentions are in terms of sports that you want, you'll have coverage to everything. You'll have access to all the different spreadsheets, and there will be overlap with NASCAR and baseball with the MVP package as well. And it's not just spreadsheets. It's daily voice chats. That's why it's a little bit more pricey than some of the other stuff. It's more of a local mom and pop shop, but you actually get hands-on coverage, and we have, I think, a very valuable voice chat system for basketball, baseball, and for football. And it's when the daily sports are back. It's every day for about 2 hours before lock. I'm in there. We're in there crunching news information, adjusting ownership projections, reacting to the ownership projections, all that good stuff. So you guys get it. I don't need to shill anymore. I love you guys. If you guys want to hang out with me, go to rundfs.com. Get yourself signed up. Great way to support the YouTube channel, rundfs.com, and myself as we hopefully soon transfer and transition into the NBA season. Hey, Thanksgiving's coming up Thursday. Maybe if you guys do some good numbers on this video, show some love, maybe we get 40 likes. Is that a lot to ask? If we get 40 likes, I'll try and throw a Thanksgiving breakdown video up. Behind the scenes, I've had a very, very crazy 2020 away from my profession. And long story short, I'll probably be solo this Thanksgiving, which is a positive, right? That means I could potentially be able to fill a void since a lot of the other content creators may have family obligations that day or the couple of days. Maybe I could fill in and give you guys something to absorb in the meantime. So look out for that. If you guys got any other questions for me, twitter.com/GundackerSports. You guys are here for NFL Week 11. I'm here to talk about it. I'm going to be referencing the NFL RunDFS.com VIP spreadsheet. If you guys aren't familiar with this, real quick, I put game notes for each game on the slate. I'll have my personal player pool filled out by Saturday night. So when you get up Sunday morning, you can know where I'm at. My tier 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s, and my favorite groups for tournaments. And of course, easy to access and sort information such as defense versus position, fantasy-wise, points allowed to each position by defenses, and then player projections, FanDuel, DraftKings, and Yahoo point projections, and then, of course, ownership projections on DraftKings and FanDuel. So I think there's a lot of benefit and a lot of value in that sheet alone for $15. So try it out, man. Show me some love, and let's get open on this slate. Hey, DraftKings, Atlanta, New Orleans, game numero uno. We will reference the Fantasy Labs Vegas tab tool and look at this game total. The Atlanta Falcons are 3.5-point underdogs right now. They were 6.5-point underdogs, but a lot of changes at the quarterback position for the Saints. Drew Brees will be out. It was initially suspected that Jameis Winston would be the quarterback here, but we saw that Taysom Hill is expected to be the starting quarterback. Now, will that prevent Sean Payton from maybe using two quarterback situation here? Are we going to have some college football shenanigans? Maybe. Financially, Jameis Winston, I think, is incentivized in his contract when it comes to playing time. So I think the number was he can get another $1.5 million, $2 million, something like that, if he gets more playing time. I don't think a couple $1 million is going to be the difference between the Saints opting to play or not play a guy, but it is another check in the column that says that, hey, maybe Taysom Hill does get a run here, because Taysom Hill did get a contract in the offseason, and that was a contract that a lot of people have looked at the Saints and been like, yeah, did you really have to pay a gadget player that money? Taysom Hill, of course, on the season, way more rushing attempts than passes attempted. But he is listed as a tight end on FanDuel. So this has created one of the highest ownership projections on a full main slate I have ever seen. He's just $4,500 going against the Atlanta Falcons, who allow the most fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks this season. So at a position as shallow as tight end usually is and highly volatile and variable, it seems rather unlikely that Taysom Hill would not be in almost all of my lineups, if not all of them. but he is projected to be over 50% owned in all formats. Usually, we could talk about leverage and stuff like that, but at the tight end position at 4,500 in this matchup, I'm not gonna get different. If I run 150 lineups on FanDuel, they likely have 150 Taysom Hill at tight end. And I know every week there seems to be that one unfadable DFS darling that just doesn't hit, but man, oh man, is this matchup paved in gold, and we've seen so many quarterbacks come before Taysom Hill, even guys like Drew Lock that have put up big fantasy numbers. They're allowing 29.2 fantasy points per game overall with 22 touchdowns allowed. So it's just a great matchup. With that said, Taysom Hill is getting all the hype and love for FanDuel, but I think on DraftKings he exists at 4,800, and that's a price point that I would gladly justify and have shares of considering the matchup. And considering at 20 fantasy points, I'm probably happy in something like a cash game. I do think in tournaments, you're always going to want 25 to 30 plus from quarterbacks. Will he get that? I don't know, maybe, but I would say that don't forget he's going to offer likely a decent floor in rushing yards. He's got 45 rushing yards in his last appearance against the Niners, 54 the game before. So when he's out there, a lot of times they put him in those wildcat packages and stuff like that. Defenses still have to respect the presence of Alvin Kamara, Latavius Murray. So Taysom Hill could rush for touchdowns in this game, and he doesn't need a whole lot. So I do think if he can give me 25 fantasy points in a tournament, considering this matchup, I think it's very viable, as the Falcons are averaging or allowed a higher average than that. Do we have to handcuff him at that price? No, but Alvin Kamara is somebody that would be introduced to my short list. He's 9,200, so the expectation is high. The targets will probably still be there for him, but the 9,200 price tag is going to make a lot of people skittish. He was on the injury report this week with a foot designation. However, he was removed from the injury report altogether Friday, so it sounds like he's fully good to go. If we take one last look at the Saints side of the injury report, nothing to see here. Alvin Kamara completely full participant in practice. So was Traquan Smith. So there's not much to worry about there. There was a light worry that maybe Lat Murray would come in and kind of vulture, and that's still a possibility. Now at 9,200, I think Alvin Kamara is going to fall to the wayside in ownership just because of that price point and because of his median range of outcomes not being a slate breaker at that price point. And Dalvin Cook's right below him in a much more tasty matchup with a lot more process and game script going his way. We'll talk about that later. So I think Alvin Kamara makes a leverage pivot, if nothing else, to Dalvin Cook when it comes to paying $8K or more at running back and making sense. Derrick Henry's in a tougher matchup at $1,000 cheaper. But yeah, Alvin Kamara is not really going to gain a whole lot of steam here at 9,200. He does have a potential to drop 30 fantasy points, but I'm not holding my breath there. Michael Thomas, cheaper than Julio Jones here. I don't know how to feel about the Saints receivers, but like I said, this has just been a really, really good matchup for all offenses throughout the year when it comes to quarterbacks and, of course, their wide receivers. So Michael Thomas is 7,300. Got himself a different quarterback. If you are a Saints fan or even just a football enthusiast, you definitely looked at Saints football this season and been like, man, Drew Brees is just not slinging it like he once was. Sean Payton can get a little bit more creative. I mean, think about how crazy the Saints offense used to be. It's the same head coach, man. He can still be crazy, and I'm sure he's probably kind of drooling at some of the ideas he can come up with having a different prototype or a different archetype quarterback than Drew Brees here. So maybe a guy like Michael Thomas comes back into the mix, and Sunday night we're like, man, we should have saw that coming. So I definitely like him as a potential handcuff. Emmanuel Sanders, you feel a little less excited with. Traquan Smith, a lot cheaper. Again, no warm and fuzzies there. But I do like the idea of Michael Thomas in tournaments. Sanders, again, all season long, it just seems like he hasn't been there with Drew Brees, but anything can happen with a different quarterback. On the Falcons side, the game projects a little bit tighter I know Matt Ryan's a guy that we've seen throw the ball 40-plus times earlier in the season. The last couple weeks with a new head coach at the driver's seat, right? Moving on from Dan Quinn. Hasn't thrown the ball as much. Matchup last week, Denver and Carolina the week before. I mean, they played with a lead, and they're projected to be underdogs here. Maybe picks back up, and we know this offense runs best for fantasy when it's more pass-centric, and we'd be looking at Julio Jones, Calvin Ridley, guys like that. Todd Gurley comes in at 5,900. There's a lot of 5 to 6K running backs that kind of make the fringe clickability. The Saints defense overall, though, has been pretty solid. So at 5,900, if Todd Gurley's going to average 15 fantasy points, if we run this game 100 times, I'm okay with not making a too big of a point to go out there and get him. So I'm kind of low overall and having a high concentration on Falcons pass catchers, but there's certainly some names that make sense when it comes to projected volume. Guys like Hayden Hurst, the Julio Jones, Calvin Ridley. Hurst, by the way, 7 or more targets in 3 weeks straight. If you're looking for double-digit fantasy points on DraftKings. On FanDuel, we're pretty well spoken for the tight end position, so we don't need to talk too much about Hurst for FanDuel, but certainly somebody on DraftKings. That would make the mix 100% Taysom Hill on FanDuel. Who's with me? Let's move on. The Lions and the Carolina Panthers. Let's go back to the injury report here and go find the Lions. I'll control F it to make it faster situation. This game does have a lot of injury implications. We'll start with the Lions side of things. First of all, Kenny Golladay going to miss yet another game with a hip injury. And then on, was it Thursday? DeAndre Swift came up with a concussion. He is officially out for this game, and that's something that a lot of us were upset to hear because DeAndre Swift was setting up to be in a great spot against a Panthers run defense that has been really, really porous. On the Panthers side, Christian McCaffrey out again, and Teddy Bridgewater questionable, limited in practice. I think they're expecting him to play. The same with Matthew Stafford, had a thumb, but they're expecting him to play. So this is a game that if we go look at the Vegas total here, Lions, pull up the Lions and Panthers. Here we go. The implied live line for the Lions is at 23.8. The Panthers 22.8. Just a 46.5 total. It's that's so average. It's whatever, but the Lions likely we can project a higher level of concentration and usage. And I'll sell 5 to 6 points on the game total if I get a team that has a higher predictive value and where the ball's going to go, where the targets, where the usage is going to go. And I'll talk about the Bengals game, the Bengals and Washington game, just a minute, because that's a perfect example. But the Lions will likely just be looking at TJ Hawkinson at 4,200 on DraftKings. Again, FanDuel, we don't have to get away from Taysom Hill, but you could. And Marvin Jones. Last week, Marvin Jones Jr., 5,500. He got 10 targets against the Washington defense with no Kenny Golladay and no DeAndre Swift, who can at least give you some separation on the ground. Averaged 5.1 yards per carry last week and is a decent pass catcher. Matthew Stafford might have to throw the ball a little bit more because now they're going to be leaning on Adrian Peterson, Kerryon Johnson. Remember, they let or no, that's the Dolphins I'm thinking of. They're leaning on Adrian Peterson, Kerryon Johnson a little bit more. Peterson's not really a yards per carry guy in 2020 that you feel safe about. So he's never been a pass catcher. So definitely think we can look at Marvin Jones to potentially curtain call a 10-plus target game. And Marvin Hall, 3,800. He got a touchdown last week. In week 1, I was kind of cornered into Quintez Cephas, and week 2 the same. I think this play has varying results, but at 3,800, certainly introduced to the player pool as a potential value. But I'm leaning on Marvin Jones, Marvin Hall, and TJ Hawkinson from the Lions, and I probably don't play either running back. Speaking of the running back situation, let's go pull up the defense versus position chart, and let's go to fantasy points per game allowed. And fourth from the top, the Carolina Panthers. on 10 touchdowns and 4.88 yards per carry have been just a dream spot for opposing running backs, and that would have been a spot for DeAndre Swift. But man, oh man, is it hard to buy into Matt Patricia and Adrian Peterson here, so I won't. But at the top of the list, how about the Detroit Lions? They've allowed 36 fantasy points per game, 13 rushing touchdowns for opposing running backs, 5 receiving touchdowns for opposing running backs. This has been a great spot. Last week, Mike Davis was owned by everyone and their mother and let the world down. He's had 4 single-digit weeks fantasy-wise in a row. Is this the flop lag spot of the century? Has moved up to $6,800, but man, is this spot screaming for the strengths of him. Look at the last week, Tampa Bay, they got behind quick, fast, and in a hurry, and it was not a good matchup. And I wrote about that in the spreadsheet last week, that I thought that had a volatile range of outcomes, but the price with the targets kind of made it hard to get away from. KC, Christian McCaffrey was back, and then Atlanta, kind of a letdown spot as well. But this, man, I mean, this definitely seems like a bounce back spot. Now, 6,800, what you need, probably 25 in tournaments, right? Can he get that? He's only done that once, and that was against the Atlanta Falcons earlier this year. But man, am I tempted to grab some shares of Mike Davis, and maybe don't even have to get too liberal with it, considering the field is kind of got that hot hand, burned hand. They just touched the stove last week with him. So I like Mike Davis process-wise. It just seems like a spot where we look back on Sunday night, knowing the information we have when it comes to Lions against running backs, just seems like an obvious spot in retrospect. Pass catcher-wise, Robbie Anderson, DJ Moore, sure. I think that spin the wheel, make a deal with those guys. It makes sense. They can come through. But it's not something like you can, hang your hat on. Robbie Anderson hasn't had 20-plus fantasy points since Week 5 against the aforementioned doormat Atlanta Falcons defense. And then even with 13 targets against the Chiefs, just 15 fantasy points. So certainly volatile range of outcomes, but we know that those are likely the guys that Bridgewater would look at. But man, Mike Davis, I'm feeling it. Let's move on to the next game. The Eagles and the Cleveland Browns. First things first, rest in peace, Uncle Phil. Let's go look at the injury report for both teams. Eagles side of things, nothing big. Rudy Ford, safety, out. Nothing else. They're kind of healthy overall. And then on the Brown side, nothing crazy. Especially offensively, other than Odell being on the IR. It's pretty normal situation for them. Going over to the Vegas total for this game. This game opened up at 47. It's moved to 47.5. The Browns are 3-point favorites. Last week, the Browns, Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb, I think they both had 19 carries apiece. I know that that was one of the win games, and everybody was staying away from that. But Baker Mayfield has only thrown the ball 18, 28, 25, 20 times in the last 4 weeks. The Cleveland Browns are by far a run-first team if they can do it. And without Odell Beckham, they have even less pressure to throw the ball. They have the 4th highest run percentage in football. And I dare say that, if you just look at neutral games where both Chubb and Hunt are active, they're going to try and run the ball. On the flip side here, the Eagles, even though they appear healthy on the surface, man, Carson Wentz is not making it easy for them. Look at this completion rate, 56.8, 55.6, 58.1, 52.5. So against or 57, he hasn't thrown for over 60% in 5 weeks. And I know there's Pittsburgh and Baltimore on the list, but 3 straight games against the NFC least Giants and Cowboys, you got to do better than that. And he just hasn't. So I do think at 5,700, this is a quarterback that can stall out a lot of drives, just being inaccurate. So between the propensity of the Browns to really run the ball, Carson Wentz's propensity to be bad, definitely think this is a game that probably has a low ceiling if you simulate it 100 times when it comes to high upside play. So for that reason, I'm likely not going to be here much. And I would also say this game, I believe, wrote up that has some weather concerns. Let's see. Eagles. 45-degree temperatures with rain showers expected throughout the game. And at the last look, it was the only game I had with rain concerns. So there's not a lot to love in this game for any format. So I'm probably just not going to be here. I think you could sell me on some shares with the Browns defense. You know, I'm not going to go to the end of the earth here, but at 3K against what Carson Wentz has been doing with the Browns being able to control the clock potentially here, maybe they fall into a pick six or something like that. Carson Wentz, I think, has the same amount of interceptions as touchdowns. Let me double check that. Yeah, 12-12, and he's fumbled the ball quite a bit. So if you wet that ball a little bit with some rain and some chilly temps, man, I do think maybe a scoop and score or something like that for the Browns is very, very possible. So I'm going to be away from the Eagles altogether, and I don't see myself having any Browns pieces outside of maybe the defense. I don't think I'm going to get to Hunt or Chubb. Yeah, I don't think I'm going to do that. But you guys let me know if you're doing something different. 19 carries, right? If you look at just about any other pair of running backs in the league, you're like, oh, they're in a committee situation. Man, these guys are getting 19 carries. I think that game might be a little anomalic just because of the win that game. But if Chubb wins the seesaw 20-15 or something like that, it's still like viable to consider those guys and maybe the early only or something like that. 7K, 6,700. But I think that's going to come down to which one gets the touchdown and will they get a 100-yard bonus. Moving on to the Patriots and the Houston Texans. Looking at the game total for this one. Keep it scrolling. This game opened up at 47 total, has moved to 49. The Pats have gone from a 24.75 implied total to 25.75, and they give a point to the Texans as well. Pats are a 2.5-point favorites. So Patriots, I think, are on this list here in terms of run percentage, yes, 53.8%. Now, a lot of that is much like the Ravens. Their quarterback runs. Cam Newton's averaging, I think, 10 carries a game this season. So I think that inflates the Patriots' run percentage a little bit. But if you look at last week, Damian Harris, who does have a Q tag on him, he had 22 carries against the Baltimore Ravens, 14-16 a couple weeks before, and he's averaging 5.5, 5.1, 6.4, 5.8 yards per carry. That's very intriguing to me because going against a Texans defense that's absolutely atrocious against the run, and on the season, the Houston Texans have allowed the most rushing yards in the league overall with just 9 games played, right? There's teams that have played 10 games and have allowed less rushing yards than the Texans. So it's a matchup paved in gold for Damian Harris when it comes to yardage. He's averaging just about what the Texans are giving up the last couple of weeks, but I think the volatility in this play is going to come down to touchdown variance. Of course, make sure he plays or does not play. He does have a chest and ankle injury. But last week, we saw Rex Burkhead get a pair of touchdowns, both receiving, I believe. And then Cam Newton, he'll vulture touchdowns like the best of them. Cam Newton has just 3 passing touchdowns on the season, but has 9 rushing touchdowns. So I like the idea, the thought of Damian Harris, but it's going to come down to, does he break one to get into the end zone for a touchdown? Damian Harris, by the way, is one of, I believe, 15 players on the injury report for the New England Patriots. It's looking a lot like the Chicago Bulls injury report from Daily Fantasy. So take that for what it's worth. Do we believe that all of these football players might be in or out? I don't know. I'm just going to go with the flow here. On the Texans side, when it comes to injury report, not a whole lot to speak of. Laramie Tunsil is questionable with an illness. Duke Johnson's healthy. David Johnson's going to be out again. I think there's merit in considering the Texans offensively just because they are pretty heavily concentrated usage. We know Will Fuller is going to get his looks. He's 6,200, 856 targets. Brandon Cooks is the most interesting to me. Even in last week's win game, still walked away with 8 targets. And he's 5,200. So this guy's had 8 or more targets essentially since Bill O'Brien was fired. I think that's a lot of volume for 5,200. Chip in a chair, kind of the opportunity. The Patriots defense isn't what they once were. And if the Patriots do that thing where they take away your best weapon, is it Will Fuller? Maybe. Duke Johnson, kind of right there, is another 5K running back that maybe gets you 15, 20 on a good day. Last couple weeks, 14, 16 carries. The targets could be a little bit better to feel better, but nothing that I'm running to. So I think my favorite Texan to take a chance on is probably going to be Brandon Cooks again. And then if we can go back to the Patriots for just a second, I think Cam Newton at 6,200 probably deserves a little bit of attention. Like I said, he's averaging 10 yards a carry. He can go against a defense that already struggles at containing the run. I don't know what they've looked like it against rushing quarterbacks. It's such a volatile stat considering how many quarterbacks in the league actually are as run intensive as the Patriots. But if you can get 10 carries, maybe get you 50 yards and has all of the potential in the world for rushing touchdowns. At 6,200, there is a range of outcomes that Cam Newton falls into 25 to 30 fantasy points here. And I would take a stab at that. I really would. And because he's only thrown 3 passing touchdowns on the season, I don't feel like you have to handcuff him to anyone. So yeah, and maybe that would be my response. If you had some Damian Harris shares, maybe you go get some Cam Newton shares, something like that. Rex Burkhead did get a lot of touchdown equity last week, 2 touchdowns, both receiving, but just 6 carries. So it's hard to feel great about that in tournaments, but he's there. Not a whole lot to stock up on here, but a couple one-offs I'm okay with. Moving on to the Titans and the Baltimore Ravens. Go look at the Vegas totals for this one. We've got a 48.5 point total. It has moved to 49.5. The Ravens are a 5-point favorite. Go check out that injury report. Control F Ravens. Anyone? Michael Pruitt, tight end, out. Adam Humphries is out. Adoree Jackson, Jadeveon Clowney, both out. Nothing else there that of note for the Titans. And on the Ravens side, nothing to note here. So this is another one of those games that I think maybe doesn't excite us with the game total, but the Ravens do have a concentrated offense, right? If you stack Lamar, or if you play Lamar Jackson, you can always stack him with some sort of confidence when it comes to volume. With Marquise Brown, he's 5,800 in this spot. He's got 7-5 targets last couple games, and we know he's going to be probably the guy that plays the most snaps on their receiving core. And then, of course, Mark Andrews, the tight end. I know Willie Snead had a touchdown last week, but these are the 2 that I would feel most confident in handcuffing with. Mark Andrews, 9 targets last week. He's one of the touchdown guys for Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson has not had a 300-yard passing game this season. If you look at his yards thrown, 249 against the Patriots, 170, 280, 186. So it's kind of his game, right? MVP caliber player, but he's not had a lot of air yards this year, but he's still running the ball with efficiency. 55, 58, 65, 108 yards in his last 4 games. His carries alone might give you a shot at a 5 to 8 point floor, and definitely has the potential to hit the end zone for a touchdown. So it's not like he's got to overcompensate, or he's lacking in compensation rather for his passing ability. 7,300 is up there, but it's still almost $1,000 discount on what he opened at as when the season opened. And if you look at his last couple weeks, the Colts are a plus defense. I think they're top 5 against the run and the pass. Pittsburgh are the number 1 defense. At Foxborough, on the road at Philly, and he did just fine there. There are some tougher matchups here, right? I think we can maybe right off a couple of these bad games. So at 7,300, if you can give me a decently low-owned shot at a Ravens mini stack, give me some Lamar and Mark Andrews, something like that, I'm game, because the Titans defensively have just been a favorable matchup for offenses. If you look at the Titans defense, they've allowed the sixth most fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. So I'm there on some low-owned Lamar stacks and tournaments. And on the Tennessee side, I think that Baltimore defense is enough to get me off of Tennessee overall. Ryan Tannehill, 27 attempts, 21. This is a run-first team by a lot. The Ravens run the most in football. Again, 10 carries a game, though. It's going to be with your quarterback. I just don't have a lot of love for the receiving core for Tennessee. Derrick Henry at 8K. He's 1,000 below the Dalvin Cooks of the slate. And, he's above a lot of the 5 and 6K viable running backs. Damian Harris did have over 100 yards against the Ravens defense. We know the Titans will give Derrick Henry the rock over and over, but it just seems like the median range of outcome is an average result for Derrick Henry, so it's not something that I feel overly excited about. His big tournament-winning games against the Vikings and the worst run defense Houston Texans, right? So, I mean, if you got 20 points here, sure, but it's just like not anything I feel like I have to have. So you can probably give me a little bit of the Ravens triple stack offensively, and I probably full fade the Titans. If you guys think otherwise, man, be sure to let me know in the comments below what you're feeling here. Let's move on to another game that should be pretty quick to assess and evaluate. It's the Pittsburgh Steelers, the undefeated Pittsburgh Steelers, taking on the Jacksonville Jaguars. This one, I think, is the most lopsided spread of the week. One of these weeks, I think the Steelers will fall to kind of like a sleeper team that stuns them. I don't think it's going to be the Jacksonville Jaguars. I just don't. But we've seen the last couple of weeks, they kind of had, remember that game with the Cowboys? They kind of got stunned early on and had to play catch up. So I do think it's coming, but I don't think it's going to be this week. The 10.5 point spread, it's the largest spread on the slate. Steelers have a 28.25 implied total, game total of 46. So immediately, if you can get to some Steelers defense, sure, they're 4,600. They're $200 cheaper than Taysom Hill. But there's a lot. They average double-digit fantasy points this year on DraftKings. And if we go look at some of the metrics in their favor, they're going to be a blitz-heavy team. They rack up the sacks. They can force turnovers. They're just a great defense. So if you can fit them in there's a lot of value this week. Go for it. I think the real question with the Pittsburgh Steelers here is what to do with the receiving core. Both sides have priced all three receivers pretty close. Juju Smith-Schuster, Deontay Johnson, Chase Claypool. Juju and Deontay likely leading the snaps there, but Claypool has been involved enough to be an impact player. 10 targets, 13 targets the last 2 weeks, just 4 receptions last week, but 2 of them were in the end zone, and that helped a Steelers double stack with Claypool and Deontay Johnson and Ben Roethlisberger be really, really impactful in tournaments. 11 targets for Deontay Johnson last week. And the need to make up stuff on offense for the Steelers is just probably coming from the lack of production for James Conner. 2.8 yards a carry against the Bengals, one of the worst run defenses in football. 2.4 against the Cowboys, 3.1 against the Ravens. Ravens are not a bad defense, but he's just not producing, right? This was remember when Le'Veon Bell left? James Conner just looked like, oh, well, there's another Le'Veon. It's just not really there. So Ben Roethlisberger, had to get it done in the air last week, which leads me to think, could he do it again here against the Jacksonville Jaguars? On the season, he's averaging just about 21 fantasy points per game, 4 touchdowns, 3 touchdowns. He's had two or more touchdowns in all but, one game this season, passing touchdowns. So it's definitely a offense that gets off by throwing the ball. I don't think I'm running to Big Ben in this spot, but I mean, he's coming off of 2 weeks that were just fine for tournaments. 28, 32 fantasy points, and we don't really hold the Jacksonville Jaguars at a much higher regard defensively than the Bengals and the Cowboys, and they smoked the Bengals by 26. So that Cowboys game was a game they had to play catch up, so you could justify them having to throw the ball a little bit more, but this is definitely a spot where Big Ben could keep it going against the Jags. But I'm probably just going to be looking at Deontay Johnson and Chase Claypool. Juju Smith at 6,400. He got 13 targets last week, another 20-plus fantasy point game for him. That's back-to-back weeks. I wouldn't talk it off. I think this is the most stressful wide receiver trifecta triangle in all of fantasy sports to get right. And last week, he just happened to get them all right. I don't think that's going to happen more often than that. I think usually it's one of three for tournaments. And then last week was like best case scenario. And then the sites have just really trolled us by putting them all within $500. No Jaguars here for me. There's just nobody I can look at and justify. And like I said, Steelers D, where I can get them. I'll double check the injury report since that's something I'm here to do. No big impact ins or outs. Jalen Samuels with a quad. Maybe that solidifies the workload for James Conner just a little bit more, but nothing here that is going to shake things up. James O'Shaughnessy out for the Jaguars if you want to look at Jaguars tight end situation, but yeah, nothing for me that I feel like I'm going to have to do. Cincinnati Bengals and the Washington football team. I'm getting better at that. Let's look at this game total. 46.5 was our live game total, and it's a 1-point spread, essentially a pick 'em. So this is a game that I love more than the total. And I talked about it a little bit earlier where I'll give up, a touchdown in a game if I feel like I have more predictive value in the usage and who the game flows through. With the Bengals, if we could pull up that injury report, we know that Joe Mixon is going to be out again. And yeah, Joe Mixon out with a foot injury. So we know that their offense is going to flow through Giovanni Bernard, Tyler Boyd, AJ Green, some T. Higgins. We just know who we can attach to Joe Burrow and get it done. So at the sake of giving up a touchdown, I'll gladly take a team that's highly concentrated when it comes to usage. And we see that in NBA as well. Some of the teams that score 90 to 100, Orlando Magic, maybe sometimes Sacramento Kings, stuff like that, we know for the most part who's going to be doing most of the damage, so I can lean on them there, and we don't get vultured or we don't give away a touchdown to a third-string tight end or something like that. So I like this game more than maybe the total suggests. I think the Bengals triple stack makes a lot of sense. Giovanni Bernard at 5,500. The game script and matchup last week not in his favor, but the 2 weeks prior, 20-plus fantasy points. We know he can be a pass catcher in PPR. That'll rack up rather quickly. So I definitely don't mind shares of Gio there. T. Higgins, 5,900, the highest priced Bengal receiver. He's gotten you 8 or more targets in 4 of his last 5 games, and essentially all season long has shown a great rapport with Joe Burrow. Don't mind him there. Tyler Boyd, 5,600 on him. 8, 7, 13, 8 targets. We know that these are guys that Joe Burrow is going to be looking at. With that said, on paper, the Washington Redskins have been a tough matchup for quarterbacks to get off against. If you go to that defense versus position tab and look at fantasy points allowed, Washington football team has been in the bottom 10, a bottom third of fantasy points allowed. And if we look at receiving yards allowed, that's running backs. I was going to say, what? Receiving yards allowed. The Washington football team has allowed the second fewest receiving yards in football with just 5 receiving touchdowns. So it stands to reason that they're good, or at least above average against the pass. 8 interceptions on the season. But at the same time, I do want to say that I think the Washington football team has maybe had the benefit of a softer strength of schedule. At least looking at the last half of the season, they had the Lions without Kenny Golladay and still gave up plenty of points there to the Lions, and I know DeAndre Swift was part of the thing, but they didn't have Kenny Golladay that day, and they gave up 276 yards passing. And then prior to that, it was the Giants, the Cowboys, the Giants. We know how abysmal their offenses have been. Baltimore, we know that Lamar Jackson hasn't had but one game where he's thrown for more than 270 yards. Kyler Murray did his thing. I mean, I do think that maybe their numbers are a little bit inflated considering the strength of schedule. So that will help me justify just a little bit more getting behind the Bengals stack for tournaments. I love that group, and I'll definitely have Joe Burrow quite a bit where I can get him. And then kind of like the Bengals, I think the Washington offer a decent enough predictive value and run back potential. Led by Terry McLaurin, he's 6,900, so the price is up there. But he's going to lead the team in targets more often than he won't. I will talk about maybe a caveat here. But he makes a fine run back because the Bengals are, for what it's worth, a cheaper group stack to kind of put together. And McLaurin's giving you 18 plus fantasy points in 3 games straight. So I don't hate that at all. It's a very, very favorable matchup. And then I know I've talked about Logan Thomas until I couldn't talk about him anymore. But they did have a change at quarterback, right? Alex Smith is under center here. He has a very low average depth of target. Logan Thomas, tight end. We've seen Alex Smith kind of lean on his tight ends a little bit more. I do think there's a range of outcome, some propensity, if you will, of Logan Thomas beefing up his targets. And at 3,300 in this matchup against the Bengals, I'm willing to go after that. The Bengals have allowed the second most fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. So it just all kind of comes together for me to justify another week of the Logan Thomas slot machine. And I think I will. Some Logan Thomas running back with some Joe Burrow, Tyler Boyd, T. Higgins, stuff like that. So that's what I'm thinking on this game. Let me know what you guys are considering or thinking or pondering when it comes to Bengals and Washington. Because I do like the game probably more than the total says I should. Maybe. I don't know. Let's move on to the Miami Dolphins and the Denver Broncos. Dolphins at last glance are projected to be the highest owned defense on the slate. There's a 45.5 point game total, and the Dolphins favored by 3.5 points. If we go look at the injury report for the Broncos and Dolphins, there's a couple things I want to go over. First of all, we'll talk about the Dolphins side. Nothing big to see for the most part, but they will be without running back Myles Gaskin yet again. He's on the IR, and Jordan Howard was released 2 weeks ago. So last week we saw the emergence and volume of Salvin Ahmed with 21 carries against the Los Angeles Chargers. He averaged 4 yards a carry. So it looks like it stands to reason to project him as the workhorse back for the Dolphins this week. Going back to that injury report, Denver Broncos have listed quarterback Drew Lock as questionable with ribs. He was limited in practice, and on Thursday he split starter reps with Brett Ripien. So we may not know for sure who's going to be the Denver Broncos quarterback until late Saturday night. So kind of keep an eye on that if you care. I don't think that's going to change much for me, although the Broncos have been an extremely pass-heavy team, not necessarily an efficiently pass-heavy team, but Drew Lock has thrown the ball 47, 48, 41, 40 times in the last 4 weeks and has been inefficient and other than the Falcons game, hello Taysom Hill, has been rather irrelevant for fantasy through 4 interceptions last week. So there's a good chance that the Broncos maybe just look at Ripien for the heck of it anyway. But nonetheless, if Drew Lock plays, even if he doesn't, the Dolphins defense right now projected to be the highest owned defense on the slate at $3,400. This is a defense averaging 9.2 fantasy points per game. Everything makes sense. And I probably don't have any Broncos receivers. Judy, Tim Patrick, none of those guys. And I probably don't play any Dolphins receivers. Yeah, I think I just stay away from this game. The most maybe interesting guy would be a shot on Salvin Ahmed, but he only had one target too. So on DraftKings, I do like getting a couple pass catch opportunities out of the backfield, and we're just not getting that with Ahmed, at least from what it seems. And that'll be kind of like the Matt Breida role, right? Or the DeAndre Washington role. I don't know. I don't see where all these targets are going to pass catchers, if there's even any. So I'm probably just going to stay away from this game overall. Altitude game. Hopefully no one pops off, and I'll play some of that Dolphins defense. Let's move on to the Jets and the Chargers. If we look at this game, the Chargers are 9.5-point home favorites here. We got a 46 game total. Not much to like from the Jets side. If we go pull up the injury report for the Jets and Dolphins, doubtful Blake Cashman, Sam Darnold, and on the Chargers side, nothing much to speak of. We talked about ownership projections. Well, right now I've got Justin Herbert as the highest owned quarterback on the slate so far. And that makes sense. He's averaging 26 fantasy points per game on DraftKings. He's $6,800. He's going against the Jets defense that just has been offering a lot of fantasy value to opposing teams. So we just saw a couple weeks ago the Chiefs were projected to blow them out, and Patrick Mahomes just absolutely got there. Keenan Allen, 7,400. It's going to be one of the highest owned receivers on the slate, naturally, as they handcuff to Herbert. Everything makes sense. I will say the prices on both of these players have me somewhat skittish in big field tournaments if the ownerships get too far above 20%. I wrote in my game notes that if Keenan Allen stays at 20% projected ownership, I'll just match the field and be okay with it. But I do think the Chargers are not quite... let's see, who did the Jets play last week? Chargers are not quite the Chiefs, right? Chiefs will run up the scoreboard. They don't care. The game script last week against the Patriots was definitely not something I expected. But the Chargers offensively just haven't been, aggressive? I mean, they're just, I still think they'll run the ball first if they can. They have a 46.6% run play ratio. I just think there's a range of outcomes where they play conservative rather than run up the scoreboard, and maybe that'll cap the ceiling for Herbert and Allen for tournaments. But in the short field checklist for cash and stuff like that, it makes all the sense in the world. So I'm not going to push back on the idea of playing him, but I'm just saying, thinking about the broader picture in tournaments, I do think there's a range of outcomes where as long as the ownership projections kind of stay at 20%, that's kind of where I'm comfortable at staying. Right, I don't want to move too far up or down from that. And I'm just not gonna play any Jets players, guys. Joe Flacco, no. The Chargers defense, 4K for what they've done this season. They're averaging 4 fantasy points a game. I that's just a lot to pay. Like, opening week against the Bengals, they had 11, and then it's nothing. Like, there's just not much there. And maybe it's because they're giving up more points than, they're giving up a lot of real points, right? And if we don't expect the Jets to score a lot of real points, maybe they do fill in the gap here. But man, oh man, it's hard to love 4K for the Chargers, right? If I'm getting to a 4K defense, I probably just get to like the Steelers, right? Steelers at 46. Do I find $600 for that? Cheaper and get the Dolphins. Saints are kind of on the board. I don't know, man. I don't know if I'm feeling that one. Let's move on to the next game. The Packers and the Colts. Packers have an implied total of 24.25. Colts 26.75. This is one of the game totals that maybe a little bit more fishy. Opened up at 49, moved to 51, and the Colts being a 2.5-point favorite. I don't know how to feel about that. I really don't, because I don't know what to think of either of these teams. First of all, let's look at the Packers scores the last couple weeks. 30-16 against the Falcons. Or excuse me, let's start from the 24-20 against the Jags, right? So barely beat the Jags. 34-17 over the backup 49ers. They lose to the Vikings 28-22. 35-20 over the Texans. Like, there's some lopsided scores, and then there's some not. And the Colts are kind of the same. 34-17. You know, they ran a lap around the Titans, and then they lose by 14 to the Ravens. They win by 20 against the Lions. They barely beat the Bengals. They drop it to the Browns. Like, these are two teams that have been super inconsistent when it comes to points on the scoreboard. So I don't know what to think of that game total. What I do know is statistically the Colts have been top 5 in DVOA against the run and the pass, and the Packers are pretty straightforward offensively, right? Rodgers, Jones, and Devontae Adams. Now, when it comes to matchups, right, I think you can volume your way against a bad pass defense versus voluming your way against against a good pass defense than voluming your way against a tough run defense. So I'm probably a little lower on Aaron Jones here. And then I also just don't know if I love the volatility of both Jones and Adams being active. But this season, running backs have scored the third least fantasy points per game against the Colts. So I'm probably going to let that kind of justify staying away from Aaron Jones and just hoping that he gets 20 or less and I can justify the fade. This season, just one game where I had to have him in tournaments, and I really had to have him in tournaments, and that's against the Detroit Lions, who have allowed the most fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. So with that said, if I'm looking at the Packers offense, probably looking at Devontae Adams at 8,600. You're likely banking on double-digit targets, and like I said, a tough pass defense is a little easier to score fantasy points on than a tough run defense because you can designate routes, you can move Adams around, and Aaron Rodgers is at a high level going to throw to Devontae Adams, and they're going to find ways to give him the ball. So if he has a chance at 10 receptions, it's a floor of 10 fantasy points, at worst 8 to 10 yards a carry, maybe that's a 20 bomb right there, and then you're hoping for a touchdown. At 8,600, if you got 25 or less, you could probably live with not having that in tournaments, but I'm seeing a lot of ownership on him right now. If I go to the player projections tab in the rundfs.com in NFL spreadsheet, go look at Adams. Got him at 17% on DraftKings, 17% on FanDuel, which, to put that in perspective, Keenan Allen is 20%. So it looks like he's right behind Keenan Allen and maybe Terry McLaurin for ownership this week. So I'm a little bit more privy to playing Adams versus Aaron Jones, but I'm not in love with either because I do respect the Colts. The Packers are on the road here, and the Colts, they're pretty well coached and are probably going to be prepared for this game. With that said, the Colts offensively pretty spread out, right? Michael Pittman Jr., since coming back from the IR, 8 targets. Zach Pascal, 566. T.Y. Hilton has dropped to $4,200, 525. There's nothing to fall in love here with. Trey Burton, 3. Mo Alley Cox, 4-3. Like, Phillip Rivers is spreading the ball around. The one name I really walked away with here was Nyheim Hines. His split with Jonathan Taylor has frustrated a lot of fantasy players this season. But if I'm looking at what really tilts the scale for any specific player on the Colts against the Packers, one is going to be the running back position, right? If we go to defensive versus position in the rundfs.com NFL VIP spreadsheet, we go to fantasy points per game allowed. The Packers are allowing the third most fantasy points per game, but it's not coming traditionally through rushing yards. The Packers have actually allowed almost a league average 905 yards. It's coming through receiving yards. They really aren't covering pass catching running backs very well. Packers have allowed the third most receiving yards to opposing running backs. The second most, if you consider that the number one most is 10 games played Giants. So they're behind just the Lions when it comes to receiving yards, with 4 receiving touchdowns allowed. That's right up Hines' alley. 6 targets last week, 3, 5, 6. So there is a tournament range of outcomes that kind of gives me hope for Nyheim Hines getting to a 20-plus fantasy point game at 5,200. So it's not something I can justify in maybe single entry or even cash, or definitely not cash. But you see that there is a path to success here. With that said, touchdown dependency is huge here. But if I'm playing Nyheim Hines, I'm hoping for 6 receptions, 60-plus yards, hopefully a touchdown, and maybe a couple of carries. So that's kind of who I came away with on the Colts side. And then if I think that the Colts run defense kind of stifles the running back situation, and I do think it does. The Colts have allowed a bottom 5-6 rushing yards on the season. I think Aaron Rodgers will have to compensate for that in the air. And even though the Colts have allowed the fewest fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, you just kind of have to believe that Rodgers either gets it done with Devontae Adams or he doesn't. So I definitely could just see some Rodgers-Adams stacks, but the price is at a premium. $7K for Rodgers, Devontae Adams $8,600. So there's definitely some cheaper, easier paths to success options in terms of handcuffs on the slate. That's just kind of what I'm thinking there. We got one game left on the docket. For do that, take a pause for the cause. Let you guys know you can get access to that RunDFS.com VIP spreadsheet with the week pass at RunDFS.com. It's just $15. You can get a full month right now for $40. And this will be the last weekend for the $40 month pass. And then NBA comes in about a month. So then the prices will go back to normal, which was $100. So you're getting $60 off the normal price. That's going to get you daily access to RunDFS.com VIP Discord. And then remember, if you guys can be early birds, take advantage of the 2017 full year pass. Get a month extra baked in. If you get the year pass for 2021, I'll give you all of December built in. And the same with the MVP package. If you know you're riding for the NBA season, you might as well get it now. This is the only week that the MVP package will be up there, and that'll get you the rest of the NFL season as well. So go check that out, RunDFS.com. If you guys got any questions, comments, concerns about that, Twitter.com/GundackerSports is how you can reach me. One game left on the docket. It's the Dallas Cowboys and the Minnesota Vikings. This game has a total of 47.5, and the Vikings are 7-point favorites. They actually were 8.5-point favorites, but I guess the Cowboys off a bye week, getting Andy Dalton, a week to prepare. Maybe bettors thought that was worth a buck and a hook, or maybe, just maybe, America's team has a lot of casual bettors. With that said, I mean, this game's pretty straightforward on what I want to target. The Cowboys have allowed the second most rushing yards in the league on the season. 8 touchdowns. They actually have allowed a kind of a lower fantasy points per game than I was expecting, but the rushing yards are up there, and this is a Vikings team that loves to rush. Dalvin Cook's $9,000. I'm looking for that 30 bomb from him, and we've seen him achieve 29 plus in 1, 2, 3, 4 of his last 6 games. And the games that he didn't do it, the Chicago Bears, a tough matchup at Chicago in the elements. And then surprisingly enough, at Seattle in a somewhat high-scoring game, just didn't get the rushing yardage there. But there's a very realistic range of outcomes for 150 rushing yards in this matchup. And then you're open for 1 to 2 touchdowns. And then, of course, we know Dalvin Cook can catch a pass or two. 9K, the pressure's up there. But I do think right now he's being listed as the highest owned running back on the slate. If I go look at my player projections, I got him at 34% on DraftKings, about the same on FanDuel. So certainly reason to suspect that you want to find a way to get Dalvin Cook in your cash games. In tournaments, I did discuss that I think Alvin Kamara is going to get a lot less traction at a similar price range. I think the simulation here, 100 times run this spot, Dalvin Cook outscores Kamara more than he doesn't, but that's why we play tournaments, just for that range of outcomes where he doesn't hit and Kamara does. But for the most part, I'm loving Dalvin Cook here. I got nothing to be discouraged about. 6,300 for Adam Thielen. 20 fantasy points his last game. Was pretty dependent on the 2 touchdowns. Targets 7-5, 4-5. Definitely you can put him in the player pool. Justin Jefferson, I love targeting him. He had 10 targets against the Chicago Bears. Tougher matchup, 24.5 fantasy points. One of the better route runners in football. But I do think this would be a spot that if the Vikings can control the game, run the ball, they have the third highest run percentage in all of football, considering that Dalvin Cook missed a couple weeks. It's pretty doggone impressive. So if they can control the game, they're going to run the ball. We might see Kirk Cousins throw the ball, 30 or less times. 36, 20, 14 times in his last 3 games. But you guys know how volatile that can be. So I definitely think Dalvin Cook for single entries and cash, and then you would kind of pepper in the receivers there. It's a 7-point spread, so a 7-point home favorite. Vikings defense at 3,300 probably makes a couple lineups for me. 10 and 9 fantasy points the last 2 weeks. The Dallas Cowboys have just been through the ringer when it comes to quarterback injuries this season. For what it's worth this week, they are getting a quarterback that has big league experience. Andy Dalton was, less than stellar for the majority of his Cincinnati career, but at the very least, you're getting a backup quarterback instead of a 4th-string quarterback, and he's had 2 weeks to prepare, and I think that's also something to think about for the Cowboys. They could surprise some people here. It's a pro football team, 2 weeks to rest, heal, prepare, so maybe they surprise some people for fantasy here. I'm not going to play Andy Dalton, but this Dallas Cowboys team was a team that a lot of people, including myself, said this could be the most dangerous receiving core in all of football. Amari Cooper, CeeDee Lamb, and Michael Gallup. Look at these prices, $5,400, $5K, $3,700. I'm not saying I'm going to run them in cash or anything like that, but there's a greater than 0% chance, especially if we got the Vikings winning handily, right? 7-point spread, he's going to have to throw the ball. Amari Cooper at $5,400? Yeah. I mean, he was $7,400 earlier this season. Might get a discount for some targets here. And then with that said, you think about this offense with backup quarterbacks on the road at Washington, which on paper is one of the best pass defenses. I think it's a little fluffy, but it's still on paper. At Philly, back-to-back weeks on the road, outside in the elements. And then last week, hosting the number 1 defense in football. I think there's something to be said here, or at least some game theory to kind of stir up here behind the potential of some of these Cowboys receivers getting it in. I'm curious, what do we have on ownership projections for the Dallas team? So actually, let me just look at Cooper. Yeah, Cooper at 6%. Does that hold up? Got Lamb at 6%. I don't want to stack Andy Dalton here, but man, you give Cooper 8 to 12 targets, CeeDee Lamb, 8 to 10 targets, even either of these guys 8 targets. Like, if they fall into the end zone with 60 yards and 6 catches, like, that's fine for their price point. So I definitely could see myself with shares of these Cowboys pass catchers. Ezekiel Elliott, $6,500. His snap percentage has been a lot lower, so giving a little bit more to Tony Pollard. I do think that's strategic. No reason to have Dak and Zeke both go down this season. He's also been dealing with a hamstring. He's been practicing in full this week. $6,500 is a cheap price for him. Again, I don't want to stack the Cowboys here, but I do think the price points here are rather interesting. Prior to the Dak injury, he was part of the pass game as well. Will that come back under a Dalton-led offense? I don't know, but Dalton has worked with guys like Gio Bernard before. So Dallas are a couple of one-offs that I definitely am going to have in my back pocket and hope they come through as the late hammer, the last game on the afternoon slate, going at the same time as the Colts and the Packers there. So anyway, if I had to make a core, what would it be? In tournaments, I really love the idea of Taysom Hill on DraftKings as well as FanDuel. So I kind of want to put him in there, and that'll open up all the salary in the world for me for Dalvin Cook. I can chalk block Keenan Allen. I still have $4,800 left. Go get that Dolphins defense. I think these mid-tier running back decisions is where the slate's going to come down to. I love the idea of Mike Davis. I just really do. I don't think I'm going to get away from that. So if I don't want to plug him in just yet, but man, is Mike Davis looking like somebody I'm going to lean on here. So there's 4 positions I like quite a bit. I also love the Burrow, Higgins, Boyd run back. If I put Boyd in there, I still think I could get T. Higgins as well for a couple hundred more. Yeah. I think I'm going to have fun making lineups this week. I just really got to figure out what we're going to do with the mid-tier running backs. Like I said, I'm digging Nyheim Hines. So if I can land myself a cheaper tight end play on DraftKings, I think TJ Hawkinson makes a world of sense here. Maybe I'll plug him in there. I don't know. I'll be doing some fun stuff. And then on FanDuel, of course, we'll start our lineups with Taysom Hill as the tight end. I think you'll see a lot of cash game lineups look like Dalvin Cook. I will say the chalk wide receivers on FanDuel, I'm less likely to jam in just because PPR isn't as strong, the 100-yard bonus isn't as strong, and it's very touchdown weighted. FanDuel really weights touchdowns a lot more than other sites do. So I think I would start with Cook, Taysom Hill. I guess in cash, you'd probably still try and get that Herbert and Allen connection. Allen's the wide receiver 4 there. They still got 57 per. Get that Dolphins. I think lineups on FanDuel this weekend are going to be nasty. 4,800 for Dolphins. Yeah. It's just that mid-tier running back spot. What are you guys thinking at running back? Obviously, Cook's one of the obviously Cook, right? But past him, like, I'm really digging Mike Davis. I don't like that 4 straight weeks of 8 fantasy points, but I'm really digging Mike Davis. Giovanni Bernard's a little bit interesting, at least on DraftKings. I talk about Nyheim Hines and even Damian Harris. If Damian Harris didn't play, maybe Rex Burkhead becomes extremely interesting. But running back it feels a lot shallower to me right now than really any week this season. So that might be where I make or break my lineups. Anyway, if you guys want to see where I finally end up, I will have my personal player pool dressed up tomorrow night. My tier 1s, 2, 3s, 4s, my favorite groupings for tournaments and all that stuff. That will be in the RunDFS.com NFL VIP spreadsheet. I'm going to get out of here. I appreciate you guys hanging out. If you would, hit that thumbs up before you hit the road. Make sure you hit that red subscribe button if you haven't yet. And otherwise, if you got anything for me, twitter.com/GundackerSports. I love you guys. Good luck. God bless. Go win some money.